Ella, a struggling student, mistakenly sat in the wrong taxi one rainy night. 7 days later, the driver revealed a secret that changed her life forever. What was this stranger hiding, and how could one mistake lead to such a shocking revelation? A mysterious ride, a hidden past, and a life-altering twist. Was it fate or something more sinister? Stay to uncover the secret that stunned Ella to her core. Ella juggled her life between textbooks and long shifts at the diner, dreaming of becoming a doctor while struggling to care for her ailing younger brother. Every day felt like a race against time and rising bills, her ambitions slipping further away with every setback. One rain-soaked evening, exhausted from her shift, she stepped into what she thought was her ride home, a sleek black taxi. The moment she sat down, she felt an eerie tension in the air. The driver, impeccably dressed in a sharp suit, said almost nothing, yet his calm demeanor felt unnervingly out of place. "Sometimes a detour takes you exactly where you need to be," he murmured cryptically, his voice carrying an unsettling weight. As the taxi navigated through the stormy city streets, Ella noticed his quiet glances in the rearview mirror, each one more unsettling than the last. Who was this man, and why did she feel like her life was about to change forever? Ella rummaged through her bag, her heartbeat racing as she realized her phone was missing. That small device was more than a phone. It held everything she needed: her study notes, her brother's medical documents, and her last connection to her already fragile world. The sound of the pouring rain outside mirrored her growing panic. She closed her eyes, praying it was just a mistake, that maybe she had overlooked it, but the empty space in her bag told another story. Her world was crumbling, one misplaced item at a time. The next morning, just as Ella was about to spiral further into despair, a knock at her door startled her. Standing there was Daniel, the taxi driver, holding her phone as if it were a lifeline. Relief surged through her, but it was short-lived. As he handed the phone to her, he included a note, his voice calm and distant. "You remind me of someone I failed to save." The words hung in the air, unsettling and cryptic. What did he mean? Why would a stranger say something so personal? Later that evening, as Ella tried to move on from the strange encounter, Daniel appeared again, this time at the diner where she worked. She watched him from the corner of her eye as he left a tip far too generous for someone ordering just coffee. His presence lingered, heavy and watchful, leaving her torn between unease and curiosity. Every glance he cast toward her carried something unspoken, a weight she could not quite explain. Who was this man, and what did he truly want? The questions swirled in her mind, but one thing was clear: Daniel was no ordinary stranger. Ella cleared a table at the diner, wiping down the surface with practiced speed. As she turned to leave, Daniel spoke quietly from his corner seat. "Not everyone will care like I do." His words froze her in place. The tone was calm, almost too calm, but there was something unsettling in its simplicity. She glanced at him, her mind racing. Was it a warning? A reassurance? She did not know, but the words clung to her, casting shadows of doubt over her gratitude. Over the next few days, Daniel became a frequent presence in her life. She would step onto the bus, only to find her fare mysteriously paid. At the end of the shift, she would discover an encouraging note tucked beneath her tip, always signed with just his initials. At first, she tried to dismiss it, chalking it up to kindness, but the deliberate nature of his gestures made it impossible to ignore. One evening, as she walked home, she spotted him from a distance. He was leaning casually against his car, watching as she approached. "You should not have to carry all of this alone," he said, his voice soft but insistent. Ella felt her walls begin to crack, the weight of her struggles making her want to believe in his sincerity. Yet a voice inside warned her to stay cautious. Who was Daniel, really? And why was he so determined to be a part of her life? Each interaction blurred the lines between genuine care and a mystery she could not unravel. Ella found herself caught between wanting to trust him and fearing what she might discover if she did. Ella was refilling coffee cups when a familiar voice caught her attention. Daniel was speaking to a regular at the counter, his tone low but firm. "I cannot let it happen again," he said, his words like a sharp echo in her mind. Ella froze, the train in her hands trembling slightly. What did he mean? What had happened before? She turned away quickly, her heart pounding with an unease she could not explain. As the day wore on, those words clung to her thoughts, refusing to let go. That night, she replayed the moment, piecing together fragments of Daniel's mysterious behavior. Every cryptic note, every quiet glance now seemed heavier, weighted with the past she was not sure she wanted to uncover. Daniel's kindness had started as a source of comfort, but now it felt like a weight pressing against her chest. The next morning, as he handed her a warm cup of tea at the diner, she found herself hesitating to take it. "Why are you doing this?" She wanted to ask, but her voice faltered. His steady gaze met hers, and for a moment, she thought she saw a flicker of pain in his eyes. "Sometimes, helping someone else is the only way to heal yourself," he said softly, almost as if he had read her thoughts. Ella's stomach churned. His words left her with more questions than answers. Why her? What was he trying to heal from? And why did his gestures feel so personal, almost desperate? Over the following days, Daniel's presence grew more pronounced. She would find bus fare already paid, small gifts waiting for her at her locker, and notes that read, "You are stronger than you know." Ella wanted to be grateful, but the uncertainty of his motives gnawed at her. Could she trust him, or was there something deeper, something darker, that he was not telling her? Every interaction left her more torn, her gratitude wrestling with suspicion, and as she lay awake that night, staring at the note in her hand, she knew one thing for certain: she had to confront the truth, even if it changed everything. Ella stared at the receipt in disbelief. The pharmacist looked at her with a faint smile and said someone already covered the cost. Her brother's medication, something she had been struggling to afford, was paid for. She clutched the bag tightly, her mind racing. Who could have done this, and why? As she stepped outside into the cold air, her thoughts turned to Daniel. Could it have been him? The possibility both comforted and unsettled her. What did he expect in return? Later that evening, she found him waiting near the diner, his expression calm but unreadable. "Why?" she asked, her voice barely more than a whisper. Daniel simply shrugged, offering a faint smile. Sometimes people just need a little help. His words hung in the air, stirring something inside her. Gratitude, suspicion, and unease blended together, leaving her without a clear response. The next day, Ella found herself confiding in him. She did not know why, but something about his quiet presence made her feel safe enough to speak. "My brother has been sick for years," she began, her voice trembling. "I work double shifts just to keep up with his treatments and my tuition. Every day feels like a battle I am losing." She paused, fighting back tears. "I just want to give him a better life, but I do not know how much more I can take." Daniel listened, his gaze steady and filled with something she could not quite place. Guilt? Admiration? Perhaps both. "You are stronger than you think," he said softly. "And sometimes, even the strongest people need someone to believe in them." His words struck a chord, but Ella could not shake the lingering questions. Who was this man, and why did he care so much about her struggles? What was he hiding behind those carefully chosen words and mysterious acts of kindness? As she walked away, the weight of his presence stayed with her, both comforting and unnerving. Ella stared at Daniel, her curiosity bubbling over as she finally asked, "Why are you helping me? Why do you even care?" Her voice carried a mix of gratitude and suspicion. Daniel hesitated, his gaze falling to the floor for a moment before he replied, "I guess I see something familiar in your fight. A part of me I thought was gone." He paused, his tone growing quieter. "Let's just say I made mistakes I cannot take back. Helping you might give me peace." His words lingered in the air like a cloud she could not disperse. What kind of mistakes? What kind of peace? Ella felt both comforted and deeply unsettled. There was a weight behind his words, a story he was keeping locked away, and she could not decide if she wanted to open the door. Days later, Daniel approached her at the diner with a determined expression. "Ella, Have you ever thought about applying for the Westbridge Scholarship? Her immediate response was a bitter laugh. That is for people who have it all together, Daniel. People like me do not even stand a chance. His calm, steady voice cut through her doubt. You work harder than anyone I have ever met. You are smart, determined, and you have a reason to fight. That is what they will see. Ella shook her head. I already tried once. I failed. Daniel leaned forward, his eyes locking onto hers. And what if this time you succeed? What if you take one more shot and change your life? Will you let your fear decide, or will you take control? His words pierced through her wall of self-doubt. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to picture a future that felt more than just survival. It felt possible. Though she hesitated, something inside her shifted. Daniel's unwavering belief in her forced her to confront the dreams she had buried long ago. Ella felt a spark of something she had long forgotten: hope. Each time Daniel appeared, whether with a book she could not afford or a piece of advice she did not realize she needed, her confidence began to stir. Ella, you are capable of so much more than you think, Daniel said one evening, placing a biology textbook on the table in front of her. I do not want this, she mumbled, staring at the cover, but her hands lingered over the pages as though they held a door she was afraid to open. You are wasting your potential, Daniel continued, his tone firm but not unkind. You have a gift. Do not let fear steal it from you. Slowly, Ella began to believe he might be right. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to imagine a future where her dreams did not seem so far away. Yet, with every gesture of support, there were moments that made her pause. She caught Daniel staring into the distance more than once, his face shadowed with something she could not name. One evening, as they sat at the diner, he fell silent mid-conversation, his eyes clouded with memories she could not see. Daniel? She asked gently. He blinked, forcing a smile that did not reach his eyes. Sorry, just old ghosts. The unease began to creep in. You are hiding something, aren't you? Ella asked one day, unable to hold back her growing curiosity. Daniel sighed, his gaze dropping to his hands. Some burdens are not worth sharing, he replied, his voice barely above a whisper. Ella wanted to press further, but fear held her back. What if knowing his truth would change everything? As much as she trusted him, she could not shake the feeling that his relentless efforts to help her were tied to a pain he was desperately trying to escape. Ella's voice trembled as she finally faced him, the question she had been holding back for weeks now bursting out. Why are you doing this for me? What do you want from me, Daniel? Her words hummed heavy in the air, and for the first time, Daniel seemed unsure of himself. He hesitated, his hands tightening around the cup in front of him. Ella, you would not understand, he finally said, his voice quieter than she had ever heard it. But she was not willing to let it go this time. Try me, she insisted, her tone both sharp and pleading. You help me, push me, and act like my life matters more than your own, but I do not even know who you are. Daniel looked away, his jaw tight, as though he was fighting an internal battle. Because he began, pausing to take a breath, I see something in you, something I lost a long time ago. Helping you, it might give me peace. His voice cracked slightly on the last word, and Ella's resolve faltered. What did you lose? She whispered, but Daniel shook his head, his gaze fixed firmly on the floor. Some things are better left buried, he muttered, but his tone carried the weight of a story untold. Ella felt both frustration and sympathy swirling within her. You cannot keep helping me while hiding this, she said, her voice softer now. I need to know why you care so much, why it feels like you are trying to fix something through me. Daniel looked up then, his eyes filled with a mix of regret and vulnerability. Ella, he said slowly, one day you will understand. But right now, you need to focus on what matters, your future, not my past. His words were final, but they only deepened the question swirling in her mind. Ella stared at Daniel, her voice trembling with frustration. I need to know the truth. You keep pushing me forward, helping me, but why? What are you running from? Her words cut through the silence, and for a moment, Daniel looked as though he might walk away. Instead, he sat down, his hands shaking slightly as he rubbed his temples. "I owe you an explanation," he said quietly, his voice carrying a weight Ella had not heard before. "But it is not an easy story to tell." She leaned in, her heart pounding, unsure of what she was about to hear. Daniel took a deep breath, his gaze distant. "I used to be a surgeon, one of the best. My life was perfect. Family, career, respect. But all of that changed in a single moment. One mistake." His voice cracked, and Ella could see the pain etched on his face. He continued, his words slow and heavy. "It was a routine procedure, something I had done countless times. But that day, I overlooked something. A small detail, but it cost everything. It cost my daughter her life." The last words came out in a whisper, but they felt like a scream to Ella. She froze, unable to process what she had just heard. "Your daughter?" she whispered. Daniel nodded, his eyes glistening. "She was my world, and I failed her. I lost my license, my family, and myself. I became a ghost, wandering, searching for some way to atone." Ella's voice quivered. "And helping me is your redemption." He nodded again, his gaze meeting hers. "You remind me of her, your strength, your resilience. I could not save her, but maybe I can help you." Tears welled up in Ella's eyes, a mixture of compassion and heartbreak. She could see the depth of his regret, the burden he carried every day. "Daniel," she said softly, "you are not the man you were then. You have a chance to be more." He looked at her, his expression torn between hope and despair. "Maybe," he said, "but redemption does not erase the past." His words hung in the air, leaving Ella with a mix of gratitude and the weight of knowing the truth. Ella sat in stunned silence, Daniel's confession replaying in her mind like an echo she could not escape. She gripped the edge of the table, her voice breaking as she finally spoke. "You lost your daughter because of a mistake." The words felt heavier than she intended, and she instantly regretted the sharpness in her tone. Daniel nodded slowly, his eyes filled with pain he had clearly carried for years. "Yes," he said softly. "It was an ordinary day, an ordinary surgery. I had done it 100 times before. But I missed something, a subtle sign, a detail that cost her life. My own daughter's life." His voice cracked, and he looked away as though afraid to meet her gaze. Ella's heart ached as she tried to comprehend the weight of his guilt. "And now, you are trying to help me too, what? Redeem yourself?" The question hung in the air, raw and unfiltered. She needed answers, but she also feared them. Daniel leaned forward, his hands trembling slightly. "I am not trying to erase the past." "That is impossible," he said, his voice trembling with emotion. "But when I see you, I see someone who still has a chance to fight for her dreams, to save her family, to do what I failed to do." Ella felt tears welling in her eyes, a mix of gratitude and unease. "You are carrying so much, Daniel, more than anyone should. But why me? Why not let go, move on?" Daniel shook his head, his expression both resolute and vulnerable. "Moving on does not mean forgetting, Ella. And helping you, it is not about me. It is about giving someone a future I could not give my daughter." Ella swallowed hard, the lump in her throat making it difficult to speak. "I do not know if I can carry that weight," she whispered. "But I know I cannot do this alone." Daniel's voice softened. "You are not alone. You never were. And as long as I have the strength to help, I will. You deserve a future, Ella. Do not let my past define what you can achieve." The room felt heavy with unspoken words, but for the first time, Ella saw Daniel not as a stranger, but as a man seeking a second chance through her. The path ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear: neither of them would walk it alone. Ella stared at the printed report in her trembling hands, each word blurred as her pulse raced. Daniel's name was there, tied to a high-profile case that had destroyed lives and reputations. She felt the weight of every whispered warning she had ignored. "How could you not tell me?" she demanded, her voice cracking. Daniel stood silently, his face heavy with regret. I trusted you, Daniel, and now I find out that you err. She stopped, unable to finish the sentence. I wanted to tell you, Daniel said quietly, his gaze fixed on the floor. But how could I? After what you have been through, how could I burden you with my shame? Ella's anger boiled over. Your shame? This is more than that, Daniel. This could ruin me, my scholarship, my future. They will take it all away if they think I am associated with you. Daniel's shoulders slumped as if the weight of his past had finally crushed him. I was not always this man, Ella. I was someone people respected, trusted, and then I made a decision, one wrong decision that changed everything. I did not just lose my career, I lost my humanity. His voice softened, but the pain in his words was razor sharp. When I saw you struggling, I thought maybe, just maybe, I could make up for what I lost. But I see now that my presence in your life might do more harm than good. Ella's voice trembled. Do you even realize what you have done to me? I cannot think clearly. I cannot breathe knowing that everything I have worked for could be stripped away because of your past. Daniel looked up, his eyes pleading. I will leave if that is what you want. But do not let my mistakes define what you achieve. You are stronger than that, stronger than I ever was. Ella wanted to scream, cry, and walk away all at once, but something in Daniel's brokenness kept her rooted. She could see that his guilt was as deep as her fear, and for the first time, she questioned whether cutting him out of her life would truly free her, or if it would only leave her hollow. As she turned to leave, Daniel's voice stopped her. Whatever choice you make, Ella, I will accept it. But please remember, your dreams are worth more than my past. Ella's fists clenched as her gaze bore into Daniel's. I want to understand, she said, her voice sharp with tension. Why would you risk dragging me into your mess? After everything I have worked for, how could you keep something like this from me? Daniel took a deep breath, his expression a mix of guilt and exhaustion. Ella, I know I should have told you, he admitted, his voice low but steady. But I thought, maybe if I could help you achieve what I could not, it would mean something. It would make up for everything I destroyed. She shook her head, the emotions swirling inside her threatening to spill over. Do you even hear yourself? This is not about redemption. This is my life, my future. What happens if people find out I am connected to you? He looked up, his eyes filled with a desperate sincerity. I will leave if that is what it takes to protect you. But please do not let fear dictate your choices. You are stronger than that. Ella felt the weight of his words, but her anger refused to relent. You do not get it, Daniel. This is not just fear. This is my one chance to escape everything holding me back. If I lose this scholarship, I lose everything. Daniel stepped closer, his voice trembling. And if you turn your back on me now, will it make you feel safer? Or will it leave you wondering if you gave up on someone who only wanted to see you succeed? The room fell silent as Ella struggled to find the words. She hated that he was right, hated the small part of her that wanted to trust him despite everything. Why did you choose me? She finally asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Daniel's face softened. Because when I look at you, I see the determination I lost. I see someone who deserves a chance, even if I do not. And I would rather carry the weight of my past than let it pull you down. Ella's breath hitched as his words settled in. Her anger simmered, but so did her empathy. She could feel his pain, his longing for redemption. But could she trust him enough to keep moving forward, knowing the risk? Her decision loomed like a storm on the horizon, threatening to change everything. I do not know if I can forgive you, she said, her voice shaking. But I also do not know if I can walk away. And with that, she left the room, leaving Daniel to wonder if he had lost her trust forever. Ella sat in her mentor's office, her heart racing as the older woman's words cut through the air like a blade. Ella, her mentor began, her tone heavy with concern. I have always supported your ambitions. That is why I must warn you, your association with Daniel could ruin everything you have worked for. Ella felt her chest tighten. He has only tried to help me, she replied, her voice defensive yet uncertain. I would not have made it this far without him. Her mentor leaned forward, her gaze piercing. Do you even know the full extent of his past? His criminal record is not just a mistake. It is a shadow that follows him, and now it threatens to follow you. Do you really want to risk your scholarship, your future, for someone like him? Ella's throat tightened. She had known about Daniel's troubled history, but hearing it framed in such stark terms made her question everything. He is not the same person anymore, she said, though her voice wavered. People can change. Her mentor sighed deeply, her expression softening but not relenting. Ella, you are one of the most promising students I have ever mentored. But the world does not always see redemption the way you do. A single misstep could cost you everything. Later that evening, Ella confronted Daniel. The words poured out of her like a flood. Why did you not tell me everything? You should have known this would come back to me. Daniel's expression darkened, his usual calm shattered. Because I believed in you, he said, his voice strained. I thought I could help you achieve what I could not. I never wanted my past to hold you back. But it does, Daniel. She shot back, her frustration mingled with pain. I am risking everything just by being near you. Do you understand what that feels like? His shoulders slumped as he looked away, his voice barely audible. Every day. I live with it every day. But I would rather lose everything again than let you fall because of me. Her anger faltered as she saw the weight of his guilt. She wanted to scream at him, to blame him for the turmoil she felt. But deep down, she knew his intentions were pure, even if his actions had brought her to this crossroads. Tears welled in her eyes as she whispered, I do not know what to do. I do not know if I can keep trusting you. Daniel's voice was steady, yet filled with sorrow. The choice is yours, Ella. But no matter what you decide, I will always want what is best for you. The silence that followed was deafening, as Ella stood on the precipice of a decision that could define her future. The room was silent except for the faint hum of the rain outside. Ella sat across from Daniel, her arms crossed tightly as if to shield herself from the storm brewing within. You need to tell me why I should trust you again, she said, her voice trembling but resolute. I need to hear it from you. Not excuses, not apologies, just the truth. Daniel's gaze was steady, but there was a weight in his eyes that made her chest tighten. He leaned forward, his hands clasped as though holding himself together. Ella, I have spent every day of the past 5 years trying to be someone better, someone who could make up for what I destroyed. But I know that my past will always haunt me and anyone who stands beside me. His words hit her like a wave, pulling at her empathy even as her fear kept her guarded. So why me? She demanded. You could have helped anyone, Daniel. Why did you choose me? He looked at her then, his voice breaking. Because you reminded me of someone I could not save. My daughter, she was full of hope, just like you. But I failed her, and I could not live with myself if I stood by and watched you fall too. Ella's breath caught in her throat. She wanted to push him away, to tell him that his guilt was not her responsibility. But his honesty had stripped away the walls she had tried so hard to build. I do not know if I can do this, Daniel, she said softly. You want me to forgive you, but I do not even know if I can trust you anymore. Your past? It could ruin everything I have worked for. I know, he replied, his voice barely above a whisper, and if it comes to that, I will walk away. I will do whatever it takes to protect your future, even if it means losing you. The sincerity in his words cut through her defenses. She looked at him, torn between the fear that he could pull her down and the hope that maybe, just maybe, he could help her rise. You cannot promise that everything will be fine, she said, her voice shaking. But if I let you stay in my life, you need to prove to me every single day that you are worth the risk. Daniel nodded, tears pooling in his eyes. I will, he said. I swear I will. For the first time in weeks, Ella felt the storm within her quiet. It was not over, not by a long shot, but for now, there was a glimmer of peace, a fragile thread of hope that maybe, just maybe, they could weather this storm together. Ella sat in the quiet of her small apartment, her thoughts running in endless circles. The weight of her decision pressed down on her chest, making it hard to breathe. She glanced at her brother's picture on the desk, a reminder of why she had worked so tirelessly. His future depended on her, and any wrong step could shatter everything she had built. Why him? She whispered to herself, her voice trembling. Why did it have to be him? Her mind replayed the warnings her mentor had given her. The words echoed like a siren, pulling her deeper into doubt. "You are playing with fire, Ella," the voice had said. "If anyone finds out about his past, it could ruin everything. Your scholarship, your future, your brother's chance for a better life." Ella buried her face in her hands, feeling the conflict tear at her heart. Daniel's face appeared in her mind, not the man with the past, but the one who had been there in her darkest moments. The one who had believed in her dreams, even when she had stopped believing in them herself. Her phone buzzed, breaking the silence. It was Daniel. She hesitated, staring at the screen. Finally, she answered. "Daniel," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Ella, I know I have no right to ask this," he began, his voice filled with emotion. "But I need you to believe me when I say I would never do anything to hurt you. If it means stepping away to protect you, I will. Just say the word." Tears welled up in her eyes. "Do you have any idea what you are asking of me?" she said, her voice cracking. "Trusting you means risking everything I have worked for, everything my brother needs." "I know," Daniel said quietly, "but trusting me also means seeing this through to the end. I am not asking you to forget my past, Ella. I am asking you to let me prove that I am not the man I used to be." Ella closed her eyes, her heart pounding in her chest. She thought of all the sacrifices she had made to get this far. Yet, in that moment, she realized that the greatest risk was not trusting Daniel. It was closing herself off from the possibility of redemption, his and her own. "I cannot promise this will be easy," she said finally, her voice steady but laced with emotion. "But if you want me to trust you, then you need to show me every single day that I made the right choice." "You have my word," Daniel said. "I will not let you down." As she ended the call, Ella felt a strange sense of calm wash over her. The path ahead was uncertain, but for the first time, she felt ready to face it, no matter the cost. Ella sat on the edge of her bed, staring at the envelope in her hands. Inside were the documents for her scholarship, a future she had worked tirelessly to secure. Yet her mind was not on the prize. It was on Daniel, the choices he had made, the risks she now faced because of them. Her heart felt heavy with doubt. "How can I trust him after everything?" she whispered. The silence of the room offered no answers. A knock at the door startled her. She hesitated before opening it to find Daniel standing there. His face bore the weight of his guilt, and his eyes carried a quiet plea. "Ella, I need to talk," he said, his voice subdued. "I know I have hurt you, and I know you have every reason to walk away. But I need you to understand, I was trying to fix the mess I made of my life." She folded her arms, her tone sharp but trembling. "You think that makes it easier for me? You put everything I worked for at risk, my future, my brother's future. How am I supposed to just forget that?" "I am not asking you to forget," Daniel said, stepping closer. "I am asking you to see me for who I am now, not the mistakes I made then. I cannot erase my past, but I can prove to you that I am not that person anymore." Ella looked away, her emotions swirling. Anger, fear, compassion, they all fought for dominance. "Do you have any idea what it took for me to get here?" she said, her voice breaking. "I cannot afford to make the wrong decision." Daniel nodded, his expression pained. "And I cannot afford to fail you. You are the one person who gave me a reason to believe I could be better. Let me prove that you were right to take a chance on me." His words hung in the air, heavy and raw. Ella's mind raced, her thoughts clouded by uncertainty. But beneath the fear, there was a glimmer of something else, hope. After what felt like an eternity, she spoke. "If I do this, you need to understand something," she said firmly. "This is not just about trust. This is about redemption, for both of us. Do not make me regret it." "I will not," Daniel said, his voice steady and resolute. "You have my word." As she closed the door, Ella felt an unfamiliar sense of peace. Forgiving him was a leap of faith, but for the first time, she felt like she was not leaping alone. The future was uncertain, but at least now she had hope. Ella sat at her small desk, her laptop glowing faintly in the dim room. The scholarship application form stared back at her, its blank spaces demanding answers she was terrified to give. Her fingers trembled over the keyboard, her mind flooded with doubt. What if she was not good enough? What if her dreams were bigger than she deserved? She exhaled sharply, shaking her head. "This is pointless," she muttered. Her voice cracked under the weight of her fear. "Why am I even trying?" From the doorway, Daniel's voice broke through the silence. "Because you are capable, Ella. You are more than capable." She turned to him, frustration etched across her face. "You do not understand, Daniel. They want perfection. They want someone who has it all figured out. That is not me." Daniel stepped into the room, his presence calm but steady. "No one has it all figured out," he said gently. "What they want is someone who refuses to give up. That is you." Ella looked away, her eyes stinging. "It is not just about me. If I fail, I am letting my brother down. I am letting everyone down." Daniel crouched beside her, meeting her gaze. "You are not failing anyone by trying. You are showing your brother that no matter how hard life gets, you do not back down. That matters more than any result." His words lingered in the air, weaving a fragile thread of courage within her. Slowly, she turned back to the screen. Her hands still shook, but this time she began to type. With each word she wrote, a piece of her fear began to dissolve, replaced by the faintest glimmer of hope. "I do not know if this will work," she said, her voice soft but steady. Daniel smiled faintly. "You do not have to know. You just have to try." Hours passed, and the application finally took shape. Ella read it over, her heart pounding with every sentence. It was raw. It was honest. It was her. "I am ready," she whispered, more to herself than anyone else. Daniel placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Then do it." With one final breath, Ella clicked submit. The confirmation screen appeared, and for the first time in weeks, she felt a weight lift from her chest. The future was uncertain, but for now, she had taken the first step. Daniel's voice broke the silence again, this time warm with pride. "No matter what happens, you did something incredible today." Ella turned to him, her lips curving into a small, hesitant smile. "Thank you, Daniel, for believing in me when I couldn't." Daniel sat alone in his dimly lit apartment, a stack of papers spread across the small wooden table. His eyes lingered on the few financial statements he had left, the ones that reminded him how far he had fallen. Yet tonight they were not a source of despair. They were a means to something greater. He glanced at Ella's scholarship application form, which she had shared with him earlier, her hopes and fears woven into every word. For the first time in years, he felt a sense of purpose. Quietly, he picked up the phone and dialed a number he had not used in ages. It rang twice before a voice answered. "Daniel?" The surprise in the tone was unmistakable. "I need a favor," he said, his voice steady but firm. "There is a scholarship fund I want to contribute to. It has to remain anonymous." There was a pause on the other end. "You are serious?" "Yes," Daniel replied, a faint tremor breaking through his calm demeanor. "It is for someone who deserves a chance more than anyone I have ever known." The conversation was brief, but as Daniel ended the call, a weight lifted from his chest. He leaned back in his chair, exhaling deeply. It was not redemption, not yet, but it was a step toward making things right. Days later, Ella received an email confirming her scholarship. Her hands trembled as she read the words aloud to her brother, her voice breaking with disbelief. "Part of it has already been funded. I do not even know how." Daniel stood silently in the background, his expression unreadable. He watched as Ella's face lit up, the doubt and fear that had shadowed her features for so long finally lifting. She turned to him, tears streaming down her face. "Daniel, I do not know what to say. This changes everything." He smiled faintly, his eyes soft with a mix of pride and sadness. "You earned this, Ella. Never forget that." As she hugged him tightly, Daniel's thoughts drifted. The guilt he carried for years felt a little lighter now. He knew his actions could never erase the mistakes of his past, but in this moment, he saw a glimmer of something he thought he had lost forever: hope. And in the quiet corners of his heart, he whispered the promise he had made to himself: one step closer to redemption. Ella stood at the doorway, her arms crossed tightly as she tried to mask the ache in her heart. Daniel, standing before her with a small bag in hand, looked at her with a softness she had not seen before. The air was heavy, not with anger or regret, but with unspoken gratitude. "You do not have to leave," Ella whispered, her voice trembling despite her resolve. Daniel gave a faint smile, shaking his head. "I do, Ella. This is your time now. You have a bright future ahead, one that does not need my shadows lingering around." Her lips quivered, but she held her ground. "You are not a shadow, Daniel. You are the reason I found the courage to dream again." His eyes glistened as he took a step closer, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "And you, Ella, have given me something I thought I lost forever: hope. Watching you fight for your dreams, seeing your determination, it reminded me that it is never too late to start over." Ella looked away, fighting the tears threatening to spill. "So, this is it? You are just leaving?" Daniel sighed deeply, the weight of his decision pressing against him. "It is not an end. It is a new beginning for both of us. I need to rebuild, to find peace with who I am. And you need to soar without feeling like you owe me anything." She finally met his gaze, her voice barely a whisper. "I will never forget what you have done for me." He smiled, a mixture of pride and sadness etched on his face. "You owe me nothing, Ella. Everything you achieve from here is because of your strength, your heart." They embraced, the hug lingering as if it could hold back the inevitable goodbye. When they finally pulled apart, Daniel turned toward the door, his steps deliberate but heavy. Before crossing the threshold, he paused and looked back one last time. "Promise me one thing," he said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "Never stop believing in yourself. The world needs people like you." Ella nodded, tears streaming down her face now. "I promise." And with that, Daniel walked away, leaving behind the city that had held his guilt for so long. As Ella stood in the doorway, watching him disappear into the distance, she felt a strange mix of loss and hope. For both of them, this was not an end. It was a chance to rewrite their stories. Ella sat on the edge of her bed, holding the scholarship approval letter tightly in her hands. For a moment, the world around her faded. She traced the words on the paper, as if they were a portal to the life she had only dared to dream about. A life not just for herself, but for her brother too. She whispered to herself, "We've made it, Lamb. This is for us." Her brother, hearing her voice, peeked in from the hallway. "Ella, is that what I think it is?" Ella turned to him, her eyes shimmering with tears of joy. "It is real, Lamb. I got the scholarship." He rushed to her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "You are amazing, Ella. You always said you would do it, and you did." For the first time in years, Ella allowed herself to believe in the possibilities ahead. She thought about the struggles they had endured, the nights when they had no answers, the days when hope seemed like a distant star. And now here they were, standing at the edge of a brighter future. "I could not have done it without you, Lamb," Ella said, ruffling his hair. "You are my reason for everything." He pulled back, looking up at her. "I know Mom and Dad would be so proud of you." Ella nodded, her heart swelling with a mix of gratitude and determination. "This is just the beginning. We have a long way to go, but now I know we can make it." The letter in her hand felt like more than just words on a page. It was a symbol of her transformation, from a girl trapped in despair to a young woman ready to take on the world. She was no longer afraid. The future was hers to shape. Standing by her window, Ella gazed out at the city lights, reflecting on the journey that had brought her here. Life, she realized, was not just about survival. It was about finding the courage to rebuild, to forgive, and to dream again. She spoke softly, as if addressing the universe itself. Second chances are not just given, they are earned. Daniel taught me that. Ella thought of him, of his quiet acts of redemption, and the hope he had sparked in her when she needed it most. He had left the city, but his influence lingered, a quiet force shaping her newfound resilience. Life can break you, she said, her voice steady, but it can also heal you, if you let it. In that moment, Ella felt a deep sense of peace. She was not just surviving anymore, she was thriving, fueled by forgiveness and the strength to move forward. Her story, she realized, was not over. It was just beginning.